Welcome everyone to this week's Torah portion. This week's portion is Vayetze, which in Hebrew means "and he went." It's found in Genesis chapter 28. Jacob leaves his hometown of Beersheba. He's running away from his brother Esau, who is upset with him that he stole his blessings. Jacob, on his journey, he's going to Haran, the land of which his mother came from. And on the way, he stops and goes to sleep on a couple of stones. And he has a dream. In this dream, there's a ladder from the earth going all the way up to the heavens. And there is angels going up and down this ladder. And God appears to Jacob in this dream and says, "The land on which you're lying on and sleeping, this land will be for your descendants to live as an inheritance forever." Jacob wakes up and he makes an altar on that land and he calls it the house of God. And this special place, known as the place, became called the house of God. Jacob arrives at Haran and he works for his uncle Laban, tending to his sheep, taking care of all of his possessions and properties. Jacob really wants to marry Laban's younger daughter, Rachel. She was beautiful and he loved her. Laban said, "On condition you work for me for 7 years." At the end of the 7 years, Jacob goes in to marry Leah. But Leah was covered under a veil. And when they went together to live, it was dark by night. And in the morning, Jacob discovered that it was not Rachel who he married, but his uncle, now his father-in-law, Laban, tricked him and gave him the older daughter, Leah, to marry. And he tells Jacob, "I'm sorry, but it is our custom that first the older daughter gets married." So Jacob, feeling very deceived, or these days you would say duped, he says, "I want to marry Rachel as well." So Laban says, "No problem, you can marry her, but on condition that afterwards you will stay here and work for another 7 years for me." Leah, the older sister, the first wife, gives birth to 6 sons, the first 6 of the famous 12 tribes of Israel: Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. Now, Rachel is still barren. She has no children. So she gives her assistant, her maid, to marry as another wife to Jacob. And he has 2 children with this maid wife, Dan and Naphtali. Now, Leah does the same thing. She gives her maid wife, whose name was Zilpah. The first one was Bilhah. And Zilpah also has 2 wives with Jacob, who were Gad and Asher. Finally, after all this, God grants Rachel her prayers, and she gives birth to a son with Jacob, and she names him Joseph. So, after working these 7 years, because he made that promise in order to marry Rachel, Jacob wants to leave. But his uncle, now father-in-law twice, persuades him to stay and work for him, and he will pay him with sheep, etc. So Jacob stays, and he's very successful, and Laban tries to swindle him, but Jacob is still becoming more and more successful and having more blessings. And finally he decides he wants to leave. So he takes his 4 wives and all of his children, and they decide to head out back to the Holy Land of Israel. And Laban starts to pursue and run after Jacob to bring him back. But God appeared to Laban in a dream and said, "Do not harm Jacob." So Laban and Jacob made a special pact with a pile of stones on a mountain called Galeed, where they made a truce and they made peace. And Jacob now starts to go with everyone to the Holy Land, and he is greeted on the way by special angels. That is all for this week's Torah portion. Thank you for joining the Rebel Rabbi for the weekly Torah. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Shalom.